go. There, and here we all are. Hi, ladies. Hi, fellow moms.
Hi.
It's
Hi,
great to see
everyone.
you all. Apologies for the little tech glitches, but here we are now, and I'm Joylyn Blake, the director of School Academy, and I'm joined by lovely friends here, and we're just going to have a great conversation. So, Holly, we're so glad you're joining us today. I'll get to read your bio here in just a minute, but again, before I start, I'll just say that I'm just going to serve as the host of this conversation, mostly between you and Monica, and my dear friend Nancy, who is the School Academy registrar. She's also a homeschooling mama of two boys that I got to see recently, and I just love these guys. But Nancy, you want to say hi? Nancy's going to help in the chat box if there's any questions or anything that come
Hi,
in.
Holly. How are you?
Hi, Nancy. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to
Well,
have you.
Thank you.
Nancy is a connoisseur of all kinds of things homeschooling mama related. So I know as I introduce Holly more formally, I'll just say that she's a homeschooling mother of three. She's wife to Andrew, and she's a writer. And this is, we'll learn more about what got us connected to begin with. But she writes biographies and she creates resources that help parents connect their children through what are called living books. And on her site, you all prepare for this, be ready to write this down. My Little Brick Schoolhouse. So Google that, search it in what search engine of your choice, but My Little Brick Schoolhouse. Her mission is to create and share books that span a wide range of subjects, and they make it easier for readers to access and think about noble ideas, truth, and beauty. She is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a degree in elementary education, and she has a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. Holly spent a summer abroad in Sevilla, Spain, and today her family enjoys spending time at the river with cousins and grandparents, living in community with their local church in North Carolina. It's a beautiful area, I know. And Nancy's just your southern neighbor. So
Oh,
she's there in South Carolina, but
oh,
um,
it's great.
she has written a book that I want to make sure that we point everybody to. Holly's the author of The Life of Chesterton, the man who carried a sword stick and a pen. And we're going to talk about that. But you can find that on Amazon. You can find that on Holly's website. It will link to that. So you'll want to check that out when we're done. And then I want to introduce Monica. For those of you who may not know Monica, Monica Meinhardt is the chair of our Aquinas House of Studies at Schola Academy. At Schola Academy, we have various houses of studies where people can learn according to a particular Christian tradition. And Monica is a homeschooling mother of five. And in her 20 years of working in Catholic religious education, she's instructed children and adults as the director of religious education, youth minister, family formation facilitator. She earned her bachelor's degree in English and early Christian studies from the University of Michigan, and she earned her master's degree in divinity from the University of Chicago. And she had a focus on biblical studies and Koine or Kine Greek, depending on your pronunciation. In her spare time, Monica enjoys reading, weightlifting, baking. She's just all kinds of cool. And her favorite saint is, pronounce this name for me, Monica. I want to be sure.
Saint Therese of Lisieux.
Lisieux. And
Yes.
I love this because Monica has, even in her email signature, this line. She strives to ever keep in mind one of Saint Teresa's favorite quotes, which is, "The world is thy ship and not thy home." I love that.
Hmm.
It's always exhortational to me when I read an email from Monica.
Oh, that's so fun.
So, So, the starters of today's conversation, I mean, we're all just fellow homeschooling mamas with different initiatives that we practice, but I wanted to get you two together, Monica and Holly, because you had an interesting connection for how this meetup came about. So, Monica, you dive in first and say, how did you get to know Holly just a bit?
Yeah, so I think this is lovely that we're having this kind of more formal, informal conversation because um, this is just where learning happens when you just kind of put the pieces together and do your research. I just closed up a scholarship skills workshop, and my final exhortation to the students was just read a bunch and read as much as you can. Find something you love to read. And so, how I discovered Holly was through preparing for a Chesterton workshop this past fall. I was kind of actually doing the workshop already, and I realized, these students who are signed up for the Chesterton workshop, they're enjoying the reading. And I don't know if it was their idea or their parents to sign them up for the class. Might have been their parents, but they don't seem to know anything about the guy. And I didn't want to spend too much time in an 8-week workshop doing a biography. I wanted them to have something that was easy to read. There are several Chesterton biographies out there, but they're quite a bit longer, and not written for middle school and high school age. And so I did some. It didn't take me long actually to find your book, Holly, and I flipped through online. You can do the preview online and saw the illustrations, and I saw it just seemed so accessible, and it seemed exactly what I wanted. I wanted something that was complete, had the full story of Chesterton, but wasn't going to bog them down for a semester reading it and trying to figure out what they're talking about. And so I found that book, and I had added it to the required reading for this current workshop that I'm doing, and then the next year we have a Chesterton class also. I'm just going to keep it on there for, forever. Um, and I was just so happy to have found it that I just did some digging. It was like, yeah, how did it actually go? So on Instagram, I found her and I just said, hey, I love your book. Thank you so much for making it. Um, Side note, I've always told my kids for years, if you love an author's work, you should write them a letter. And you never know, you might get something back. And my kids have done this historically, and they'll get, not every author will write back, but several have. And it's been really fun. So anyhow, so I just wanted to give her my praise and gratitude for writing this. And she just so charitably responded and said, hey, if I can come into one of your classes sometime, I'd love to. Here's a free, study guide to a book club study guide to use. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. It was way the best response I've ever gotten. Um, and so that was the beginning. And so she is going to join us actually in a couple weeks in my workshop, and the students are super excited. Um, yeah, so that's
I'm excited.
So, Holly, tell us what inspired it, because as we said, homeschooling mamas are busy, full lives, and especially younger kids, but you wrote this book. So tell us a little bit more about kind of the backstory.
So the backstory, I would say, is I was at home during 2020, and my kids were all very young, like 5 and under, turning 6 and under. And I was inspired to write a book because I had been following for a while the ideas of Charlotte Mason. And if you're familiar with her, she was a British education reformer in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And she did a lot of she exposed me to the idea of living books. And so I immersed my homeschool. At that time, we were starting homeschooling. I immersed my homeschool with living books, went to the library. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the term living book, a living book is a book written um, by usually one author who is passionate about the subject. And it not only gives you facts, but it sparks the imagination and fires up the emotions. And it is usually told in narrative form. So I was going to the library and going, buying books for my own homeschool that involved beautiful illustrations that would not only point my kids to facts and enrich them in their vocabulary and their knowledge, but expand their idea of beauty. And so these books, for example, one of them that I remember reading very often with my own children was a book on Louis Braille when he was growing up in his childhood and what that looked like. And you know that he later invented Braille for those people who cannot see. So yes, just loving that with my children. But that really inspired me to start thinking about maybe, well, if I enjoy this so much, why don't I just write one myself? And biography just really spoke to me. And so I ended up sitting down and writing a picture book biography on the life of Lego founder Ole Kirk Christensen from Denmark. And I didn't, really know how to go about this whole publishing process, but I knew I wanted to try to query publishers. And so I did. And eventually I was put in touch with a small publishing company out of Kansas called Blue Sky Daisies. I found them on a podcast interview, kind of like this. And I queried them, and they actually, to my surprise, because I had queried a lot of people, they were on board with this because their vision kind of matched mine. But sadly, that project did not come to fruition because Lego, I don't know if you're familiar, but the Lego group recently, during the whole publishing process with them, we found out that they do not allow people to write about the founder of Lego unless they go through the Lego group. And so that would be considered copyright infringement or trademark infringement. So anyway, long story short, that project did not work. But somewhere along the line, I started thinking, well, who else is a very inspirational figure who maybe isn't as well known as Lego founder? Um, and I thought about the Christians in the 20th century and the writers of that time. And we all know, a lot of us know about C.S. Lewis, but I was reminded of G.K. Chesterton. And for my own edification, I was like, I need to learn more about him because I've heard of him. My friend recommended a book, The Man Who Was Thursday, and I tried to get through it and I couldn't. Let me go back to him. And the more I learned, the more I read about him and the more I read of him, I was just kind of like captivated by his mind. He was a man of so many different, I wouldn't just call them hobbies, but just interests. And he was really pivotal in writing to speak to people who came later, like C.S. Lewis. So they can thank, I think, Chesterton for, in part, for their conversion to the Christian faith. So I was really just captivated by him. And then I decided to write a picture book because that's what I thought in my mind. I'm like, I'm just going to do a picture book. My publishing company, they accepted that query, but they said, we don't want it to be a picture book. We think that we need something a little bit more informational. And yes, including pen and ink drawings. That's our vision. But we want you to write a chapter book for 8 to 14-year-olds, 10 to 14-year-olds. The sweet spot is, I would say, 10 to 14. And so I thought, okay, well, I got to go back to the drawing board because I did all this research, but I did and got some good biographies. Not all biographies are created equally, and I had to learn that during the research process. But I did find some good biographies on G.K. Chesterton and was able to go back and really like organize my information better and then write it in a narrative form. So that came about. And then I was blessed to find the illustrator, Nellie Buchanan, who was she made the project what it is. So it was my long answer.
Can I say I just love the format. So as you're talking about how you initially were going to write about the Lego founder, you did. And then that kind of reminded me of those, those Who Was books,
Oh,
that
yes.
series. But I just think that if they ever made a G.K. Chesterton Who Was book, it would just feel a little off. Like it would just not be Chesterton. So the illustrations you're talking about and the way that you wrote it, it just, I don't know, it is Chesterton. It just fits. And so I love that it's different.
You want to show it again, Monica?
Yeah.
You could even, I mean, it's just so
Like
beautiful.
it would just look so silly if his head was really big or something,
Right.
Yes.
But this is
Yeah.
just so, it's just, it's very Charlotte Mason. It's very, everything that you said, you definitely followed through with all of that. And I am so grateful. And I think that's what appealed to me so much about it.
Thank
Uh,
you. Yeah. I think the publishers had that vision. They knew they did not want to go the direction of caricature,
yeah.
um, you know, uh,
Mhm.
and there's a time and a place for that. But I think they were really hopeful to make it more of almost like a work of art with Nellie's illustrations. It truly is.
Oh, they're
So,
beautiful. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Chesterton was an artist, right? That was
yes.
one thing that we learn in the biography, that he was an artist first of all, and so that definitely paid homage to him.
Thanks. Yes. I
Mhm.
thought that was a good vision.
Mhm.
I love it when there's a lot of integrity in a book that from the cover all the way through it is, I think that's a good way to put it, Monica, paying homage or being congruent with who they were. And I mean, it just makes a beautiful addition to a bookshelf and then just the family library in general. And I'm really glad, Holly, that you defined what you consider living books. Lots of us, understand and are familiar with the Charlotte Mason method. In fact, on Classical U with Classical Academic Press, we even have a course on some Charlotte Mason ideas and an audio book about Charlotte Mason. So, but it's this idea of enriching living books literature. And I noticed, Holly, on your website that you have this line about you're working to make it easier for readers to access and to think about noble ideas, truth, and beauty. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that, I think Monica has even affirmed that her Chesterton workshop in their class has really experienced that with your book, that easier access to to his example and those noble ideas. So my question though for you is related to, at the same time, especially as classical educators, we give our kids some tough stuff to read too, or some meaty kind of content. So I wonder just if you could give us some reflections on, the accessibility and the ease versus some of the inherent struggle that's there at times. And do you have kind of a guiding light as you work to strike that balance of not removing all struggle, but also not putting up barriers when they should be able to access something? Do you have any thoughts to share?
I think it goes back to our values and knowing our definitions, defining our terms, like what is a student and what is a teacher? What is the teacher's role? And I've heard, various answers to that question over my life. I was a teacher in the public schools before I discovered classical education, before I discovered homeschooling and the various ways you can do it. There's more than one way. And but there's the theoretical kind of like classroom answer, and then there's the more like applicable rubber meets the road answer. And I think for me, like where those two intersect, it's like we have to know, like, children come to us, they're not empty vessels. They have a framework, but at the same time, they're children and they still are um, not weaker in the sense that they're lesser, but they're weaker in the sense that they still haven't matured enough into kind of like with weightlifting, Monica weightlifts. Uh, you start out when you're starting out, you don't go straight for the really heavy weights. You have to build your strength. And I think with kids, it's the same with maturity. And we know that different age groups have different zones of development that they're going through. And even within those cohorts, those zones of development, you have individuals within. So you have to kind of think about your own kids. Like my second grader, uh, you know, daughter might be different from my second grader son, like when he was coming through. And so for us, though, I think like just thinking about their natural abilities, each individual's natural abilities, and their curiosities, and then knowing what they need to, because it's important to follow the child's interest to a point, but it's also important to be that, authority to kind of guide them and show them the way, because children, as wonderful as they are, they need direction. And so I think you can develop this by modeling first. And so with literature, I haven't quite gotten to that point in my education where I'm really going through like the really dense texts with my own kids. I mean, my son's in sixth grade, but he is reading The Hobbit now, and we listened to that on audiobook about 2 or 3 months ago. We finished it, so I feel like kind of, and that was kind of a coincidence because I didn't know that we would be reading it now. So it was kind of like, oh, this is great. I gave him by coincidence that framework or that what is it? Pre-teaching of the concept. So thinking, through The Hobbit, talking about The Hobbit, listening to it on audio first maybe, and then going back and getting into the nitty-gritty, character development. And then we have also just modeling, like what it is like to think through an idea and, reading something aloud and talking about it, discussion, and not just asking like comprehension questions, but having like discussions like what really surprised you in that chapter? Or like, did you see any similarities between Bilbo and remember how we studied the British people, a few weeks ago in history? Like, do you see any parallels there or any interesting like intersections there? Just like I think really real world learning and discussion help to you're modeling for them what it's like to think about these big ideas, but you're also alongside them. You're not completely releasing them to write their own essay like at the very beginning. You have the modeling, you have the discussion, and the scaffolding to get them to the point where they can just sit down and maybe off the cuff, they can use what they already know, what they've already been modeled to discuss on their own or give a speech or write an essay. All of those things I'm kind of looking ahead to in my own path as a home teacher, home educator. But I think just having like this, when all else kind of like fails, like when all the theoretical stuff just seems overwhelming, I think it's just good to go back to what you love to do with your student. And I think honestly, for us, the best thing has been reading aloud and talking about it and just sitting shoulder to shoulder. Uh, those things like going back to those loves that you have as the educator, because that is something they can catch from you, that passion, if they see that you're really into it and into the topic. Go back to maybe something you enjoy teaching, something or a book that you really love as in your own reading, like your independent reading. In your own reading, maybe point out some things that you're learning. um, I think keeping a commonplace book is a great way for moms to kind of put down the most important things they want to hold on to and remember, and then share that with their family. It doesn't have to be too complicated in the everyday, but I think we can also watch our kids struggle a little bit when it comes to just learning how to formulate their opinions and their ideas and use all the rules, of grammar properly. Like there will be some of that struggle, and learning's not supposed to be easy the whole time. There's going to be some rigor and some struggle. So understanding that's good for them. It helps them build that muscle and knowing, valuing them for their individuality, but also knowing where they are kind of in their development. It's all kind of part of the big umbrella of teaching.
Yeah, I think you mentioned reading aloud, and I think that's so critical. And that was something I noticed. You said you taught in public schools, and my kids were in public schools for a period of time, and now we're fully committed to homeschooling. But that was one thing that actually my son's third grade teacher in public schools was not from. He was actually from the UK, and he said that in the UK they read aloud all the time, and it was very normal. And so he was still reading aloud to them in third grade, which when you hear this in with the perspective of a schooling parent, you think, well, of course you'd read aloud in third grade, but in the school system, they're not reading aloud in third grade anymore. That's no, they should, it's all independent and they're all on tech, and I could go on and on. But so I think reading aloud at all ages too, doesn't matter. As soon as I'm sure we've all experienced this, you open a book, you start reading aloud, and your high schooler comes in and they're listening. It's amazing. And And so to kind of piggyback on that, how do you make it accessible? Don't stress over rereading. I like that you also said, Holly, that you listened to the audiobook first and then read it, I think another thing that is a beautiful aspect of homeschooling is that we have space and time to go slow if we need to press pause and say, maybe now's not the right time to read this book. Maybe we wait a couple years. Or, you know what, let's bring in this other resource instead and just slow it all down. I was going to have us read 4 books this year. We're just going to read one now because we want to dive more deeply into this. And so, yeah, I can really connect with both of those ideas.
Hmm.
I have been recently listening to a couple of podcasts and writings on duty and desire and the tension between those two things, and how ideally those things held in tension, but then even pulled together. That where we begin to desire what is our duty, and that tension of like what you love and then what you ought. And as a parent, how we help to kind of steer that, so to speak. And I really love how you brought up, like weightlifting and working out, and Monica's our exemplar in this regard. But I used to often, when I was teaching in the school system, I often use that as an example to students because I would say I can be a spotter, I can be a guide and a director. I can be a tour guide to acquaint you with all of the equipment and tell you about how to safely use it. I can give you the exercises that build up your strength to the point of being able to be used. And I can do all of these things. But in the end, what's going to happen if I'm the one to sit down there and lift the weight for you? Are you going to get what you came here to get? You know? And of course, that's no. So there is a part that we as a parent obviously play in the coaching and guiding along the way. And then there's a part that they lift the weights. And that's such a good example of they're not ready for the heaviest stuff first. So it's definitely that building of that muscle to prepare them for that. Um, so it's a great example, and thank you for introducing that tension, Holly, or speaking to it, because I want to introduce one more tension. And I think it's so interesting just on this call here. All of us Christians faithfully raising our families according to our particular and unique Christian tradition. So I wanted to pitch something your way, Monica. To explore another little tension here, because Monica is the chair of our Aquinas House, and you're Catholic, as we noted, and then Holly, you're Protestant, Reformed from the Reformed tradition, and yet Monica, you found Holly's book in the writing there about Chesterton, who is Catholic, to be very fruitful for this particular course in the Aquinas House. So, and I've heard you say elsewhere too, Monica, that like you don't want to, you want to raise your children as faithful Catholics, but not to assume that doing that is dwelling in the Catholic bubble entirely, right? I've heard you mention that. So. I want to ask you to speak to how do we, as moms, affirm and uphold our centrally held beliefs, but without putting our family in a so-called bubble and being devastated when it's pricked. How do you get that richness?
Yeah, I think, well, although that's three very separate questions in a way, though they seem connected kind of, but and they're connected a little bit. But yeah, so for me personally, though I am Catholic and uh I intentionally wanted to go to a non-Catholic university for both undergrad and grad school, and I studied biblical studies, but I didn't want to have a biased perspective. I wanted to come at Catholicism from as neutral of a perspective as possible. So I studied early Christian studies at University of Michigan. Many of my English professors were atheists, and uh, the early Christian studies instructors were of certain faiths, some of them, but not necessarily all of them. We would be looking at Greek papyri from the New Testament, and I'd be having a spiritual experience, and they'd just be very like, strictly academic. But anyways, all that to say, I think that really helped for me, and I definitely think that's why I'm here with School A Academy because it's so ecumenical, and I really, really strongly believe that the the church is ecumenical, though we have all these specific traditions that we all believe are the right one. I still believe that. And so, anyhow, so I wanted my kids to have the same experience, and I think that it's a disservice in a way to isolate your children. And I think the funny thing is that's so remarkable to me about homeschooling is I think that a lot of those on the outside of homeschooling would think that we are maybe, oh, putting your kids in a bubble, you're not exposing them. But the homeschooling community is so big now that if you're signing your kids up for any homeschooling activity, which most of us are, probably a handful of activities, whether it's these online classes with School A or other online classes or homeschool PE or whatever it is, you are sending them out and you're not in that bubble if there ever was one. And so that's great because then getting the bubble pricked, like getting those, they go out, they hear so and so talking about this and that, whether it's a different uh, faith tradition or the absence of secular homeschooling is on the rise vastly. But then they can immediately come to you. You create that environment where you talk about it, you have a conversation, and then they go back out. I mean, sometimes it's literally that quickly, like they're playing, they're off, you're sitting in the car waiting for them, which we all do all the time. And then they come back, hey, so and so said this, and you talk about it for a minute, and then they're off. And it's just this very um, private instruction, really, in the moral life and in your values and what you believe. And so I think many of us as homeschoolers, and I think many parents in general too, want to have those conversations with their kids, but hear a lot of time, wow, your kids tell you this and that. My kids don't tell me anything. I've heard that from some friends, some people I've known that are maybe their kids are gone all day. And, so when you're home with them, you get that interaction much more frequently. And I have yet to experience that. So yeah, I think giving them frequent opportunities and then also within literature, that's the other area, right? So bringing it back to what we're talking about to begin with. So like you mentioned, Joylyn, that I'm Catholic, Holly's Protestant, Chesterton was Catholic, Lewis is Protestant. We could go on and on. Um, First of all, Holly, I actually thought you were Catholic once I read the book the first time because you so beautifully described his faith. And I mean, I just was blown away by that because I think that's a challenge. I think that would be hard for me to describe someone else's faith so beautifully, not sharing their same faith exactly. So yeah, that was amazing.
Thank you for saying that. Well, after a lot of just time talking to the publishers, we wanted to definitely present his conversion. Um, and so we had that, like, I had to read very, fine print detail. What would a conversion ceremony look like? Like, what would they wear? And I know this might be, I hope I'm not derailing the conversation. Nellie, the artist, had to research on her own and find a priest and talk to him about the clothing. And she had to really be careful about the time period and getting everything right there. So yeah, just it was good. It was a good research practice and research. But yes, and I think it's really cool to see how Chesterton's faith developed over his life. Like he started out in kind of an agnostic family that was a happy family, a caring family, loving family, but not really a faithful family in the sense of like, talking about the gospel and talking about the things of the faith. I think he started out that way, and then he moved towards like the Anglican Church after he had a faith crisis, a spiritual crisis early on in his life when he was in art school. And that was really cool to see how God had taken him out of that and changed his perspective and given him scripture. And so, yeah, I think every Christian can, attest to the power of scripture. And he met his wife, Frances, who was Anglican, and then he ended up converting later in life, and then she converted after he did. So I thought that was kind of neat to see his journey throughout life. He's
Oh,
very faithful. Yeah.
so good. So if you all haven't got Holly's book yet. You need to pick it up to get all the good, rich nuggets that are there. And I think that we all agree that Chesterton really is for everyone. He's so good to be exposed to his biography, his writings, and then to let our children wrestle with him in some very fun ways. He's like extraordinarily imaginative. So I want us to, as we kind of wrap up, and then we'll also take some questions if anybody has any, but I want us to also say, well, if we recognize, Chesterton's for everybody, what other homeschooling mama nuggets could you give? Like, hey, I also think this is for everybody, or this is some things that I think is whether it's, authors or activities or even recipes, whatever. I'm like, oh, this is for everybody. This is my little homeschooling nugget. So y'all mull on that for a second. And then I'm also gonna say, Nancy, I know you've been just quiet over there, and I'm sure this
Mhm.
has sparked all kinds of thoughts in your own homeschooling mama mind. So, do you have any questions and or comments that you want to add that you want to be sure any of these ladies speak to? Or
Yeah, Holly, you had mentioned something before that I think is something that I tell myself as a homeschooling mom. I tell friends, I tell parents that call Schooling Academy. You had mentioned something about just because like you're doing something with one student doesn't mean it's necessarily going to fit or work for another student. And we tend to put all of our kids kind of in the same bracket sometimes, right? And I think it's so important that families understand this, that you can learn things in many different ways, right? And just because it fits for one of your kids at that age does not mean that it's going to fit for that other child at that other age. But something that I feel like is always consistent, it's always something that families can do is reading aloud, audiobooks. These things I feel like are so bonding. Like, it could be multiple ages. Um, and that's a richness I feel like that you kind of can't get anywhere else with anything that any other kind of subject that we read. Like if you like I noticed like my older son loves history and we could listen to a great audiobook and I noticed that my 4-year-old he's like what? Like he's in. And so he'll start saying little things that he's learned along the way. Um so, not necessarily everything could be, for all your students, but I loved how you had mentioned that about, I think you said your second grader, like it was good for your, I think you said second grade, right? Like
Mhm.
your second grade children. And I think that's great and that families really need to understand that. But reading aloud and audiobooks are just something that can really capture the whole audience.
And there's no rule for when you do it or how you do it too. It can be very deliberate, alone in a room, reading aloud, or it can be in the car, it can be late at night, it can be dad reading at night, it could, there's, yeah, older siblings. Yeah.
Yes, I'm learning as our family morphs. It's taken shape in different ways. Like we used to do a devoted like morning time, and we would have like a read aloud as part of that. And then as kids got a little older, um, it's changed. It's been more towards evening time. So, you just have to kind of be flexible with that. But yeah, I don't have to look any one particular way. I love that.
And
that's
it could change day to day, right? Like if you're
Right.
gonna know, you know what, we're gonna be in the car for a big chunk of the day. So guess
Hmm.
what? We're gonna listen to an audiobook or we're home all day today. And let's just make some time in the afternoon after lunch to just sit down. That's what I love about it. There's no so you don't have to, schedule it in. Could just happen in a very natural way. And
Yeah.
sometimes it may not happen for a day or two, right? Or sometimes a week.
Yeah.
But you can pick it up again and just kind of go back to right where you were.
And the
Yeah.
fruit is always the same, which is just amazing. Yeah.
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 Yeah, as someone who like my four children are all grown and flown, just one last little baby still in the nest, and this is her final year. And I can say that over the course of moving various states, various countries, various school systems, various years, we had this kind of like little consistent thing where at either their birthday or Christmas time or both, I usually gave them a book, a picture book, and I'd write inside or whatever. I know we all do this, or it's part of it. And now in their adult life, and one of them already married and so forth, it's like they have their little library to take with them, and we'll have our Christmas books that we pull out at Christmas time or whatever. And the thing that it activates in them, the memories, the nostalgia, the warmth, the lessons, it's all there. Even though the trek, you could not have plotted this as like, oh, it's very predictable pattern and this very tight and cohesive plan that was always the same. No, the common theme is change. There's a lot of change, and you have to be flexible as you go along. But just as you beautifully said, Monica, the richness, the fruit comes up the same, that they remember it and they carry it with them. So Nancy's answered the first nugget. I mean, like Chesterton's for everybody, read alouds are for everybody.
I was going to say that,
Good
Nancy, so you
stories are for
stole you
everybody.
stole mine.
Yeah.
But I also liked how you said, Holly, that they have to see us doing it as
Yeah.
well, right? They need to like, like my older son, he's 13 and we're to the point now where like, if I'm reading something that's a little bit more, if it could be something like theological, whatever, that I could not necessarily read the book to him, but I could be like, hey, this is what I learned today, like something I never knew or I never thought about in this way. And just talking about it. And that, I've has been I think has been a huge adjustment that I've seen in my older son. Like, oh, mom does this too. Like, even though, because sometimes I do this like, either early in the morning or late at night, and so no one sees me doing it, right? But I've become more intentional of taking a few minutes in the afternoon and just having them see me do it. Have a book in my hand, not a computer in my face, not my phone in my hand, like a physical book of just, I need 5 minutes. I want to read this for 5 minutes. Like, give me 5 minutes. But just seeing them do those little nuggets of like 5 minutes at a time, um, I have known has changed the way, especially my older son. Well, now my youngest too, he's 4. I'll see him be like, oh, I'm gonna go read in my room for 5 minutes. I got my book, and I'm like, okay, he can't read, but he's looking at the pictures, and it's cute. But they're seeing me do it. And I feel like that is a huge, huge deal that they're seeing. It's not me just telling them to do it. I'm actually doing it with them. Um,
Yeah. And he's reading the pictures, so that's one form of early reading, like emergent
yes.
reading. And also, yeah, to your point about the fact that we get to do it too. I think it's important not only for them to see us do it, but it's like we need that. Like we need, and I forget that. I can break away and take a minute to go outside and read if I'm feeling a little stressed. I think it's a good pick me up. Or go, I would, do you want to hear my answer to what's for everybody? I was going to
100%.
say this is similar to reading aloud in that it gives you time, like really thinking over what's true, good, beautiful. But I was going to say nature study. Um, and I know G.K. Chesterton, this is a connection. He loved going on walks out in nature. Some of his best essays were probably written outside. I mean, have you read A Piece of Chalk, Monica?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I just picture him like walking in the like south of England over the like limestone
Yeah.
hills. But I just love nature study, but I struggle with like consistency there. It's not something I just like work in very well. I think it can sometimes be too structured sometimes, but for me, in the past, I have in our co-op, I was like the nature study mom, and I just enjoyed like the little tiny like expose kids to like a little observation here. Like let's go and like look at these flowers at the botanical garden and sketch them in our nature notebooks. And then later you can watercolor them at home. And I'm not a watercolor artist, but I've been able to just through, and I'm trying to find it right now. Ah! Oh, here it is. Sorry. I'm going to get it. This book that I have, it's called Watercolor in the Forest. That might be too bright. But this book has taught me just basic like technique and stuff, and anyone can do it. It's not hard in the sense like you don't have to have an art degree. And so I've just enjoyed going outside and like learning how to draw a petaled flower. And, you know, it's been fun for me, I guess, because I'm just maybe geared more towards that artistic, just for fun. I just enjoy that. But I think pretty much anyone can. You're out in nature, you're observing, maybe you're seeing like how a bird builds its nest over the course of a certain amount of time. And maybe you're tallying like what birds have come to visit us like in certain months, like on our at our bird feeder at our window. Who do we see like in the month of December? What kind of birds do we see in May? And contrasting that and just having kind of these talks, and it evokes wonder. It evokes wonder at God's creation. I think Chesterton and many others, Lewis, Tolkien, were just wonder-filled people, and they saw things a little differently because of that. I mean, the perspectives were really inspiring, and I think it's because they were beholding something beautiful and awe-inspiring, like God's work in nature, and of course, other things too, other avenues, literature, um, humanities, all of that. So,
I
but
love
I'd
that.
say nature study.
It's a beautiful answer. My oldest son's earliest memory, he'll still talk about it to this day, watching ants climb up a tree in our little yard when we were living in Canada. He still like is locked into that fascination. So yeah, I think nature studies, intentional time in nature, observing, sketching is so critical. Monica, Nancy
I
stole your answer, but you've
Yeah,
had time
I
to
had a few
cook up
I had a
another
few
one.
answers. Yeah, no,
We're
I have a
ready.
few more. Okay, so I want to say one thing first that so Chesterton is for everyone, but I think you have to know where to start. And I think that's true for many challenging authors. So many times, myself included, my husband's joke with me is that, he says, I bought you The Everlasting Man years ago, and you never read it. And
Mhm.
like I don't know, it felt inaccessible to me at the time. He's like, you do realize you were an English major. I was like, I don't know. I don't know what it was. It was hard for me at the time. And then, so my entry point to Chesterton was through his short stories. I picked up a book on eBay, this book, Daylight and Nightmare, and it had a bunch of his short stories in it. And that's when I really dove in. So I think it depends on where you start and how you start. For other people, it might be Father Brown mysteries. Sure, some people might want to start with a really heavy theology, but I think for what I'm talking about for children, and that's kind of my goal with these workshops and these classes, is to have an entry point that we can all access. And I think that's so true for any good literature. Second point, just to piggyback on both of what Holly and Nancy said, with having them, children watching you read, we do a lot of, I read the kids' books. I read the books that they find fascinating, and it's not for school. So I'm I'm on book 4 of Anne of Green Gables, and gosh darn it, I'm gonna have to finish it because my daughter is gonna just, I don't know, she's gonna be really mad at me if I don't. I'm also on the 4th book in the Giver Quartet, which is amazing, and I have a few pages left, and it's just I've loved this series so much. Um, and so we have this we have our school books and we have the things that you have to read or you're doing it for class. And then we have this whole other category of books that we're exchanging books with each other. And we don't have to all love each other's books, but I think that shows a level of investment from the parents that is different. That's saying, not just here, you read all of this and I read my separate things. Like, no, I'll read what you find beautiful too. And actually, all of their books are amazing. So with that, what I think is for everyone is younger children's literature. I think, Winnie the Pooh, right? With Chesterton, he loved George MacDonald, fairy tales, fables. These are for everyone. And so we read them, we focus on them a lot sometimes as homeschoolers when they're really young. But gosh, revisit them. Wasn't it is C.S. Lewis's dedication, right, to Lucy? One day you'll be old enough to enjoy fairy tales again. And that was Narnia. And that's so true because when you're younger, you read it with a different lens. And then in middle school, you're reading it with a different lens. And then high school, and then adulthood. And then once you're a parent. And so, you
Mhm.
know, In Little Women, my favorite character is Marmee. It's not one of the girls, but if I was a girl reading, I didn't read it when I was growing up. I'm sure I would have loved Joe when I was younger. So yeah, I think the youngest literature. I just told one of my classes this too, like Amelia Bedelia, even her, right?
Mhm.
How many kids understand what she's saying when they're in first grade? Not many, probably. I mean, you read it as an adult and it's hilarious, or as a high schooler. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think don't and there's so much wisdom. Winnie the Pooh, so much wisdom, so much wisdom. You could just read that aloud every year and just talk about the moral life and gosh, you could go on all any fairy tale you could pick, any fable, and yeah. So that was a lot of answers, but
Oh,
Oh, I love that you tied in fairy tale um and fable because as an adult I've found I have a rekindled love for old fairy tales, but also George MacDonald. I didn't know his work when I was a child.
me either.
And so like I've read a couple of his and I'm like, wow, these are really unique, but not at the same time. Like they're unique in that he wrote them. Like they are his ideas. But he ties into all these old transcendent themes that you find in across many fairy tales. Like, for the motifs like light being wisdom and you have these motifs that are common to all fairy tales because they kind of explain what it's like to be human. Um, so yes, like uh, different things. Like you'll see if a character goes through a transformation in their life. Sometimes it's because they drink a potion or something and they change. Or like they have a fever and they go through this transformation. Or it might be, there's so many different motifs found, but it's interesting how they cross cultures too. And you're like, wow, this kind of ties all of humanity together because I know these two stories are not the same, but they have so many interesting similarities in their themes. It makes you wonder, like, there has to be something objective that we all humans can experience and look to and then retell in our own way. So I feel like that's kind of neat.
oh, such a beautiful observation. And as I mentioned, I was listening to a podcast recently, and you can look up this podcast. It's a relatively new one called Forged. Brian Williams, who is the dean of the Templeton Honors College, is the host for it, and we're kind of dipping into it here at Scully Academy because he's hosted various people. He hosted Andy Crouch for a conversation about AI, but this last one that he hosted was the poet Malcolm Guite. And it was very fascinating because, of course, if you've never even listened to Malcolm Guite's voice, you just have to listen just for that reason. Like you can imagine it's this poetic, raspy, deep. You can imagine him with a pipe in his mouth, and you could just listen to him. But the premise of what he was arguing was that, or compelling us to believe, is the import of the fantastic and fairy stories as portals to like universal truth and how you revisit them year over year over year and they have these really deepening truths that you understand. They're kind of inexhaustible. And he talked about how his mother, even at a young age, was what was it? Maybe she would quote to him the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner or other things that he was like, I wasn't even processing it fully, but even the stuff that was implanted in him and in his mind and in his heart from a very young age with his mother took deep root, and it's things wells that he continues to draw from. So I think all of us can take this as an encouragement and an exhortation for us homeschooling mamas in whatever phase, whether really young preschool and babies still in our arms, like Monica has, to, preschool, teenage, and into their young adult lives. And then, you know what, I'm still looking forward to some grandparenting at some point. Then um, you never outgrow this richness, it just deepens. And so don't abandon it. As Nancy said, don't get caught with a phone in your face more than a book in your hand. Is there anything else you ladies would like to add as an exhortation before we kind of wrap up this conversation?
I think that just to kind of close out about Chesterton, I think that was one of his great things. The class I'm teaching in the fall is Cultivating Joy with G.K. Chesterton. And Holly, you speak about his joy greatly in your biography. And I think that's what we're really talking about here with fables and fairy tales too, that joy that just continues to grow and keyword cultivate, right? Like over time. I think about one of my favorite scripture is Matthew 18:3. Unless you are like a little child, you shall not inherit the kingdom. And I think also about like little kids who I've had my kids, I don't know if your kids have ever asked you this, ask me, do I have to get rid of my stuffed animals when I get older? Do I have to get rid of my dolls? No, of course not. And likewise, when we come to our children and say, oh my gosh, you have to read this fairy tale I just read, it's amazing. They see that truth and that response that we're not joking, that you don't have to get rid of your stuffed animals, that you don't have to get rid of that. And that will not only sustain you, but Christ himself told us to be childlike. And I think that that childlike surrender and that childlike joy, all you have to do is look at a little child and you can see that and appreciate it. So that's Chesterton, I think. And I think that is for everyone. Joy is obviously for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, I like how that scripture, it all goes back to scripture and finding our joy in the Lord ultimately.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, Holly, is there anything you want to point our listeners to? I mean, I would happily point them toward your book
Mhm.
and your website. Anything else you want folks to be sure we know about you and can follow up if we're curious to know more?
Well, I would say that I'm on social media some, but I've taken a little break from that in recent months.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll go back into it in a little bit, but I found that the best way to contact me is by email. And so you can find my email address probably on my website. But for those of you who want to email, I love emailing because I feel like it's a little more personal. My email address is Holly, Holly, at mylittlebrickschoolhouse.com. So I know that's a lot, but that's my email. And my website is mylittlebrickschoolhouse.com.
And this
So
meeting is proof that you respond quickly.
I try.
Not to put any pressure on you, but
I'm not always the most techie person as we experienced here, but I try. I sure do try.
Oh, well, it has been an utter delight, and I encourage you to reach out to Holly and get to know the rich resources that she has to offer. Check out Monica's course and workshop on Chesterton and the other things. Oh, listen, I'm going to give you all a sneak peek. This is like first time view. You ready? Now, other people don't even know. This is going to be up on the website on Monday, the Schola Academy website. So I'm just going to give people a quick look at our summer courses that are going to go live on the website, like I said, on Monday, and then people can enroll on Wednesday. So you got a couple of days to do a little window shopping, everybody. But here's one of them among many. This one just delights me. A lower school book club, Manners with Miss Pigglewiggle and the Goops. And if you click on any of these titles, you can see this cute little flyer that pulls up and all the information taught by yours truly, Miss Monica Meinhardt, as well as so many others. It's adorable. So, the great thing about Schola Academy summer courses is that they come with no grades, no attendance requirements, just as we say, like this deep and delightful, joy-filled learning. I mean, Chesterton would be proud, right?
Mhm.
So, look for that on Monday, but. No, we're so glad that, Holly, I'm so glad that you took time, that you responded to Monica's email, and that we are able to enjoy the richness and the fruits of your hours of labor. May it bear much fruit in the Lord and in these students' lives. Thank you also for being willing to visit their little class later on. That's
I'm excited about that. That's gonna be fun.
yeah, that's
they're
gonna
gonna
be
pepper you,
great.
I'm sure. So thank you again, and for everybody who joined us live, and for those who will watch this recording later. I hope that you moms gained mutual encouragement from all of us. Thank you all so much. Have a great Holy Week. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.